You're floating through dusk. The light is sand-colored and slow. The air smells like warmed linen and river water. You drift downward, not in a rush, never in a rush, and softly land on a quiet footpath just beyond the banks of the Nile, sometime around 1200 BCE. A donkey is dozing beside a woven basket of onions. The onions are asleep, too. In the near distance, a boy skips a pebble across the water like he's trying to startle R.A. himself. The splash barely echoes. Nothing here wants to be loud. You breathe in thick heat and dry reeds and maybe just a whiff of date syrup. You are in Deir el-Medina, the village of the artisans who build tombs for kings, queens, and whomever else can afford eternal real estate. These are the people who quietly make the afterlife look stylish, and they're surprisingly chatty about love, especially on broken pottery shards. Now, before you doze off like the donkey, because you will, here's your gentle warning. You probably won't make it through this day. Not because of any curses or crocodiles, but because it's all just a bit too calm. But before you drift off completely, maybe tap the like button gently, like it's a lotus blossom. If you feel cozy enough, comment your location and the time you're listening. It makes us feel like we're all stargazing from the same sand dune. Now, let's ease into tonight's journey. You walk slowly toward a cluster of mud brick homes, sun-washed and worn smooth by time. Women chat in low tones while grinding barley. A child hums a tune to a half-finished doll. Someone sneezes in the distance, and four people say life without turning their heads. That's polite magic, Egyptian style. A man waves you toward a shaded courtyard. His tunic is dyed faint blue, the color of loyalty or laundry runoff. He's a scribe, and not just any scribe. His job is writing love poems on potsherds. No, really, that old bit of ceramic at your feet? It might have been a jar for fig jam 3 weeks ago, but now it carries someone's feelings. Clumsy, desperate, or occasionally shockingly poetic. You pick one up. The edge is jagged, like heartbreak, but the handwriting is neat. It reads more or less, I passed by her door. She wasn't there. My breath left me. Also, I stubbed my toe. Some scholars call it the earliest known tweet. Here's a historical fact worth scribbling on your own personal potsherd. Ancient Egyptian love poems were commonly written on ostraca, those leftover shards of limestone or pottery used like scratch paper. Papyrus was expensive. Love apparently was cheap and abundant. You sit near the scribe. He's humming to himself, probably editing a verse for his cousin, who just got ghosted by a flax weaver. You ask how he chooses which pieces to write on. He shrugs. It's whatever breaks clean. Metaphor? Maybe. Accidental wisdom? Always. His table is cluttered with fragments of old jars, each carrying a tiny universe of longing. You read one that says, My heart is like a honeycomb crushed under sandals. You blink. Okay, that one's dramatic. Probably didn't end well. The weird cultural tidbit of the day. These poems were often part of school exercises. That's right, young scribes in training wrote about longing, rejection, and passionate glances as homework. Imagine diagramming sentences like, If she would only glance once, my liver would leap into the sky. Historians still debate whether this was genuine literature or a highly emotional standardized test. A breeze shuffles across the courtyard, stirring some loose reeds. You close your eyes briefly. The heat hums like a tired harp string. Someone somewhere begins singing a lullaby about a crocodile who fell in love with the moon. You feel the edge of sleep approaching, the kind that doesn't knock, just tiptoes in and borrows a pillow. You wake gently, as if you never quite left. The sky is still the same pale gold, though the shadows have stretched like cats in the sun. The scribe is still there, still humming. You ask him if people really wrote these poems for love, or if it was more about showing off their penmanship. He laughs softly. It's both, and sometimes it's revenge. He hands you a newer shard. The ink hasn't dried yet. It reads, "You said I was as sweet as lotus wine. Then you kissed my sister. Enjoy your hangover." And just like that, you've stumbled into the world's earliest subtweet. The drama, the heartbreak, the public shade, all captured on things once used to carry oil or lentils. You walk with the scribe through the village, past sun-cracked walls and sleeping goats. The air smells like warm dust and fennel. You hear someone whisper practicing a poem behind a curtain, nervously pacing like they're about to confess their feelings or file a formal complaint. You turn a corner and there, tucked between two houses, is a tiny school for scribes. The students are bent over their slates, lips pursed, ink smudged on their noses. One is trying to write a metaphor about lips as soft as pigeon feathers. Another is just drawing the same cat over and over. It's a living. A teacher, bald, patient, the eternal face of pedagogical fatigue, points out a chart etched on the wall. It's a list of approved poetic themes. Admire her from afar. Compare her to fruit. Mention your burning liver. Yep, the liver, not the heart. Egyptians thought emotions were stored in the liver, which means all their love poems were technically gut-wrenching. That's your major historical fact of this section. To the ancient Egyptians, the liver was the emotional control center. So if someone said, "You moved my liver," they weren't sick, they were smitten. You pause near a student who's writing very seriously. His ostrakhan reads, "She passed by. I dropped my bread." You nod, respectfully. We've all been there. Meanwhile, in the background, two older scribes debate whether it's acceptable to rhyme lotus with focus. A third interjects that nothing rhymes with hippopotamus, and the debate escalates into gentle sighing. You pick up a shard from a pile and notice it has musical notations. Sort of lines and dots, clearly experimental. That, the teacher says, was an attempt to turn a poem into a melody. Failed miserably. The goats hated it. Your weird tidbit? Some Egyptian love poems had musical direction or meter scrawled above them, suggesting they might have been sung, or at least recited dramatically at parties where someone inevitably brought too much date wine. Historians still debate whether these notations were formal music or just overly emotional punctuation. You walk back toward the river with your own fragment in hand, not quite sure if it's a poem or a grocery list disguised as one. The breeze tugs at your robe. The river glints with sleepy light. You sit under a palm tree, watching two fishermen arguing softly about whether one of them caught the same fish twice. You decide it doesn't matter. Somewhere behind you, the scribe is reading one last poem aloud to the wind. When you look at me, I forget how to spell my own name. When you don't, I remember it too much. You smile, and your liver perhaps moves just a little. The sun dips lower, casting long golden shadows across the village like the soft brushstrokes of a tired painter. You walk slowly past a cluster of fig trees, their leaves murmuring secrets in the wind. Somewhere close by, a group of young scribes are playing a game with pebbles and laughter, occasionally shouting lines of bad poetry at one another like it's a competition, which, in fact, it is. The rules are unclear, but the judging is brutal. You pause near an elderly woman who sits weaving a basket, her fingers as quick as her eyes are slow. She hums an old tune, something wordless and oddly familiar. When you ask her about love poems, she just chuckles and taps a jar with her knuckle. You don't need words to feel it, she says. But it helps when you're trying to win back someone who's taken your good sandals. She offers you some dried dates and gestures toward the Temple of Hathor in the distance. Go there, she says. That's where the really lovesick ones go. So you do. You follow a soft path of sand and hoofprints to a modest temple, honey-colored and half-covered in ivy. The air cools slightly beneath its stone archways. Inside, incense curls like lazy thoughts. You hear faint chanting from a priestess, something soothing, like instructions for folding linen but set to music. You are in the temple dedicated to Hathor, goddess of love, music, fertility, and, perhaps unintentionally, the arts of awkward flirting and oversharing. Here's your major historical fact. Hathor was one of the most widely worshipped deities in ancient Egypt, particularly linked to music, dance, joy, and emotional connection. Her temples often served as spiritual spaces for those seeking love or healing from heartbreak. You sit near a low stone bench as a young man kneels before a statue, clay shard in hand. He's whispering a poem under his breath, clearly hoping divine intervention will improve his chances with someone who, frankly, is probably already interested. But this is the ancient world. Romantic progress often depends on courage and crop yields. He places the shard gently in a basket beneath the statue, a sort of offering to the goddess of good vibes and second chances. Beside him, a priestess quietly sorts through dozens of similar shards. Some are poetic. Some are more logistical. One simply says, "Please make Nebbit notice me. I'm very clean now. Your weird tidbit." Some love spells and hopeful messages in Hathor's temples were written using honey as ink, perhaps symbolizing the sweetness of the request. Though honestly, it also probably just attracted ants. Historians still debate whether these ritual love shards were ever actually read by priests or just left to pile up like ancient emotional spam folders. You wander through a side chamber. There are murals here, faded but still elegant, showing dancers in flowing linen and musicians playing harps with languid arms. One woman sings with her head tilted toward a crescent moon. You can almost hear the softness of it, the way her voice might curl around the edges of the stone walls. A cat slinks past your ankles. It does not care about your presence. It has more pressing concerns, like deciding which sunbeam to nap in next. You lean against a column etched with lotus blossoms. Time slows again. You think about all the words etched in clay, whispered into temples, or left unsaid beside rivers. The ancient Egyptians might have believed in 42 moral declarations at judgment. But here, in Hathor's shadow, they only need one: I have loved. A breeze carries the scent of rosewater and old stone. Somewhere, someone plays a single note on a harp, and it hangs in the air like a memory that hasn't decided whether to stay. Your eyes begin to flutter closed, but you're not asleep yet. Later, or maybe earlier, you find yourself seated at the edge of a quiet workshop just beyond the village. The scribe from before is here, but now he's joined by a potter, her arms dusted in white slip, her expression one of permanent gentle concentration. They're discussing something very seriously: whether poetry should go on the inside of a jar lid for privacy, or the outside for dramatic flair. You smile. This is clearly a debate with consequences. Nearby, rows of sun-dried pots sit like obedient students waiting to be assigned feelings. Some are large, meant for wine or grain. Others are tiny, possibly just decorative or terribly shy. Here's your major historical fact. While many people think of hieroglyphs as formal inscriptions for kings and tombs, most everyday writing in Egypt was done in hieratic, a cursive form used for day-to-day scribbling. This includes poems, love notes, and questionable life advice. The potter invites you to try inscribing a line yourself. She hands you a flat shard and a reed brush dipped in ink. It feels like writing on a dried leaf with a strand of hair. You pause, then write, "You smiled once. I've been rearranged since." Not bad. The scribe raises an eyebrow in approval. The potter mutters, 7 out of 10. Tough crowd. Your weird tidbit? Some Egyptians, particularly during the New Kingdom, believed that writing a name or a feeling on pottery and then breaking it had magical power. You could literally shatter heartache, though hopefully not someone else's pottery in the process. Historians still debate whether this was symbolic magic or just a deeply cathartic way to end a bad date. Suddenly, the potter picks up a jar and points. On the inside of the lid, in tiny letters, someone has written, "I only dream of her when I forget to think." You don't know whether it's brilliant or nonsense, but it makes your chest feel quiet. The light is softer now. It wraps everything in a muted gold, like the village itself is sinking into sleep. You feel a breeze carry the smell of clay and charcoal. Somewhere in the distance, a chorus of frogs begins to warm up like a sleepy band with no real ambition. The potter tells you that once, a couple got engaged by trading shards. Each had half a poem. They didn't plan it, they just both liked the same metaphor about geese. You ask what happened next. She shrugs. Probably kids. Or goats. You rest your head against the wall, still warm from the sun. And as your eyes begin to close again, you imagine a world where feelings are scrawled in ink, baked into clay and left behind for the breeze to remember. You think you might be in love with that idea alone. You wake not with a start but with a stretch, the kind of slow, vertebrae-clicking stretch that only comes when you're still warm from sleep and just curious enough about the next moment to unpeel your eyes. The village is quieter now. Even the goats seem to have clocked out early. A soft lavender dusk hugs the air, and the pottery workshop is just a silhouette behind you, half swallowed by shade and the whispering of reeds. You follow a narrow trail toward the Nile. The river isn't loud. It doesn't rush or ripple like it does in romantic paintings. Instead, it moves with the patience of someone who has read every poem and is now politely waiting for the sequel. You reach a flat rock near the water's edge. Someone's been here recently. There's a small bundle of lotus petals, an empty cup, and a familiar-looking potsherd with a poem. Your voice was in the reed flute. Now it's just the wind. You consider responding with something clever, but the frogs are louder now, and honestly, they're better poets tonight. Here's your major historical fact. The Nile was more than just a river. It was a source of poetic metaphor, spiritual symbolism, and actual ink. Scribes often used soot and water from the river to make the very ink they used to write these verses. The mosquitoes here are historically accurate and a bit too affectionate, so you gently swat one and move along. Up ahead, a small group of young lovers are standing on the riverbank, pretending not to look at one another. It's a scene you've seen in every era. Lingering, awkward postures and high-stakes silences. One of them is holding a folded piece of linen. He's clearly trying to decide whether to hand it over or wait for the goddess Hathor to personally nudge his elbow. Eventually, he caves. He offers the cloth like a peace treaty, mumbling something about finding it. He didn't. She takes it, reads the short poem written in saffron dye, and smiles like she's trying not to smile. Somewhere in the reeds, a heron lifts off like it's bored of watching humans figure out their feelings. Your weird cultural tidbit. In some Nile villages, love poems were occasionally embroidered onto clothing, usually in hidden places, like under the hem of a robe or inside a sleeve cuff. Subtle declarations meant to be discovered slowly. Historians still debate whether these linen love notes were meant as private flirtation or just elaborate inside jokes between lovers. You pass the couple and give them a soft, knowing smile. The boy blushes. The girl does not. Beyond the bend in the river, you reach a small grove where an elder sits beside a fire. His job, you're told, is to remember stories, not to tell them, just to remember them. When people forget, they come to him like you'd go to a library missing its index. He's carving something into a thick piece of wood, not for practical use, just for rhythm. The grooves seem to match the tempo of a lullaby he's humming. You ask if he knows any love poems. He looks at you, nods once, then says, "All poems are about love, even the ones about rain." You think about that for a while. Night has arrived like a soft curtain drawn across the sky. No drama, just an understanding between light and shadow. The stars take their time showing up, like shy guests arriving late to a party that's mostly frogs and old statues. You're seated now at the edge of a courtyard. There's an oil lamp flickering beside you and a dog who's decided your feet are officially furniture. The woman across from you is a musician. She's tuning a small harp, her fingers moving in practice circles. Songs are just poems with breath, she says. And sometimes humming helps people remember the words they don't know they forgot. She plays a few notes. They sound like the wind had a nice day. Your major historical fact: ancient Egyptians composed love songs that were often sung in public festivals, particularly during the beautiful festival of the valley. These songs were surprisingly candid, describing emotions and even longing in terms that still feel familiar today. One popular lyric, found scratched into pottery and painted on tomb walls, went something like, "I wish I were your laundryman, so I could wash the clothes that touch your body." Romance. Always somewhere between heartfelt and hilariously specific. The musician laughs when you repeat the line. "Classic," she says, "though it sounds better with drums." She offers you a tambourine, but you're more in a listener mood. The firelight dances across the painted courtyard walls. Lotus blossoms, leaping fish, two lovers beneath a fig tree. You can't tell if it's decoration or diary. Your weird tidbit. Some tombs of musicians included instruments that still held traces of resin or perfume. It's believed they may have scented their harps for performances, a kind of multisensory mood setting. Because when you're singing about love, sandalwood helps. Historians still debate whether these musical performances were structured events or spontaneous serenades that just happened to occur every evening around wine o'clock. You lean back. The oil lamp hisses gently. The dog sighs like it's had a long day managing its fan club. The musician sings a verse she claims is over 1,000 years old. You believe her. The song is soft, rhythmic, simple. The lyrics go something like, "When I see you, my legs forget their legs. When I hear you, my name feels too short. And when you leave, the wind borrows your voice." It isn't flashy. It doesn't need to be. It's the kind of song you forget and remember at the same time. You feel your breath slow down. Not asleep yet, but close. She sings another verse. And then another. You stop counting. Just the sound, the warmth, and the feeling of being in a world where even shards of broken pottery still carry someone's heartbeat. The morning is slow to rise, and that's exactly how you like it. There's no rooster here, just the soft swishing of brooms sweeping dust from the temple steps. You stretch in a patch of sun that's been politely reserved for your arrival, and watch as the city wakes up like a cat. Slowly, luxuriously, with minimal regard for urgency. Today you're in the scribal district, which is a fancy way of saying where the ink-stained introverts live. Small courtyards spill with reed pens, old sandals, and half-written drafts of very serious documents, some of which might just be poems thinly disguised as tax records. Your first stop is a modest home with a wide, shaded porch. A young girl sits cross-legged on the floor, scribbling something onto a cracked shard of pottery. You ask what it is. She grins and replies, "Homework, but I made it sad." You peer over her shoulder and read, "I waited for your voice. It came in a dream instead." Cheeky. She explains that in her class, students sometimes practice writing by copying old poems, especially ones about love. It teaches them structure, grammar, and how to pine properly. The last part isn't officially in the curriculum, but it shows up anyway. Here's your major historical fact. Ostraca, those broken pieces of pottery used as notepads, were everywhere in ancient Egypt. Students, scribes, and even board guards would write on them. They've been found with math problems, tax lists, doodles, and yes, love poems. Your cultural tidbit? In one cache of ostraca discovered near the village of Deir el-Medina, archaeologists found a piece featuring nothing but a perfectly inked drawing of a cat staring at a bird, and a single line beneath it. I wish I were the breeze between us. Historians still debate whether that's metaphor or just the earliest recorded example of someone flirting and procrastinating at the same time. You stroll further down the alley, past scribes hunched over papyrus rolls. One man is reciting his work aloud, though it sounds less like reading and more like pleading with the gods to fix his rhymes. Too much moon, not enough swoon, he mutters. Poetry, it seems, is a lifelong struggle, even when you have access to divine metaphors and an excellent tan. You pause beside a wall where someone has painted a miniature mural. Two lovers, meeting beneath a tree, one holding a jug, the other a reed flute. The jug is cracked, the flute unfinished. Love in this city is everywhere, and sometimes it leaves room for edits. You take a boat across a narrow canal. It's more like a glorified floating basket. Really, steered by a boy who claims he's 17 but has the voice of someone who's still arguing with his own facial hair. The water smells like memory, soft, green, a little murky. On either side, reeds sway in the wind, whispering secrets in a language you almost understand. Your fingers trail the surface. It's warm, slower than expected, like it's been waiting for you to catch up. Your destination? A small garden near a temple complex. Private, peaceful, and home to a group of poet priests. You're told they write devotional songs, but when the priestesses aren't looking, they sneak in lines about longing and unbuttoned tunics. The garden is lush, overgrown in the most organized way possible. Flowers lean toward the sun like worshippers. Bees float from bloom to bloom, clearly on their second cup of nectar. You sit on a stone bench still warm from the day. Priest in linen robes joins you. He looks like the kind of man who's never rushed a sentence in his life. Poetry, he says, is just prayer with fewer expectations. Then he hands you a potsherd with a poem scratched in fine, deliberate lines. Even when I worship, it is your name in my mouth. The gods understand. They are not jealous. That's your major historical fact. Egyptian religious poetry often blurred the lines between the divine and the deeply personal. Hymns to deities like Hathor and Isis frequently read like romantic ballads. Was the love spiritual, sensual, or both? Scholars are still debating. Here's your weird tidbit. Some poems were deliberately written in double meanings, called ambiguous hymns. They could be read as prayers to a goddess or love letters to a very charming temple musician. Interpret at your own risk. The priest stands, bows politely, and leaves you to the garden and the bees. You lean back. The sun glows gold through the leaves. Somewhere nearby, a reed flute begins to play, soft, lilting, a tune that stumbles a bit but doesn't mind. Like someone learning how to sing again. The flute continues. A dog barks in the distance, then decides it wasn't worth the effort. A breeze lifts the hem of your robe and then sets it down again, like it's checking in. You don't move. You're listening too closely to the space between the notes. And somewhere between the garden and the melody, you realize, not all poems need endings. Some just hover like incense in the evening air, perfumed, quiet, and meant to be breathed in slowly. Later that day, or maybe it's early evening, you've lost track. You're guided into the back room of a perfumer's shop. The shop itself is ordinary, filled with tiny jars and scented oils. But the room in back feels like a forgotten wing of a dream. Low lamps flicker on brass stands. The air is thick with frankincense and stories. There's a gentle hum of conversation, but no one is really talking. Just people reading, writing, or leaning against cushions with that look of, I might nap or invent a genre. You're in a poetry salon. These gatherings, tucked into homes, temple courtyards, or perfumers' shops, were informal, semi-sacred places where scribes and thinkers came to test out verses and pass around metaphor like it was freshly baked bread. A man with a feather tattoo on his collarbone reads from a long scroll. His voice is deep and slow, like a lion trying not to wake the baby. The poem he reads, it's about a woman who sends a love letter on a lotus leaf, then regrets it, then sends another one that says, never mind. The audience laughs. Quietly, of course. Here's your major historical fact. Informal literary salons were known in certain Egyptian communities, particularly among scribes. Though we don't have direct evidence of open mic nights, the volume of personal poetry and correspondence suggests strong oral sharing traditions. Your obscure tidbit? Some love poems in ancient Egypt were attributed not to men, but to female speakers, unusual for the time. One famous line reads, my heart is not calm unless I am near you, like a crocodile that rests only in the sun. Historians still debate whether women actually authored these poems, or whether male scribes were writing in the voice of women for dramatic flair. Either way, it's clear. Someone was very emotionally available. A boy passes you a cup of cool beer, not the foamy, hops-heavy kind, but the soft, cloudy, bread-thick kind that tastes like fermented dusk. You sip it politely. It helps the poetry go down. Another recitation begins. This one's more serious, about a lover who drowned, but not tragically. More like dramatically. There's a difference. Apparently, she walked into the river because she was consumed with affection and too many figs. You decide to remember that line. Outside, the evening deepens. The first stars blink awake. You linger in the back room, the scent of cardamom rising. Someone starts humming, and the sound folds into the fabric of the night like it belongs there, which it probably does. You walk home, or somewhere that might as well be home, with the night curling around your shoulders like a shawl. The streets are quieter now. Lamps flicker from windows. A donkey exhales like it's had a very long week. The smell of roasted onions and warm bread drifts from a nearby kitchen. You consider knocking just to say thank you. Remember that market street you passed on your first day? It's back, but different now. Softer, less overwhelming. The stalls are closing up, and someone is sweeping a square of dust like it matters. Maybe it does. You pause at a pottery stall still lit from within. An old woman, sharp eyes, gentle hands, waves you in. She's glazing tiny cups, each with a painted line of poetry along the rim. No two are the same. Want one? She asks, holding up a cup painted with a falcon and a single line. When you left, the sky blinked slower. You ask where she gets the poems. She shrugs. They're always in the air. You just have to listen. She tells you the cups are popular gifts between lovers and siblings. Even the occasional ambitious fisherman trying to woo a priest's daughter. Words last longer than figs, she says, tapping the rim. Here's your major historical fact. Decorated pottery with poetic inscriptions was a common gift and household item in certain Egyptian periods. Though not always love poems, they often carried well-known lines or blessings. Obscure tidbit? Some families had a tradition of hiding small ostraca with secret messages around the house, like love notes, jokes, or lines of poetry left on shelves or under pillows. The earliest version of a sticky note? Maybe. Historians still debate how widespread this practice was, but the fact that it existed at all means someone, somewhere, took the time to write. Come home soon. I fed the cat. I miss your mouth. The potter hands you the cup and won't take your coin. It's better if you owe me a poem, she says. Outside, the street smells like earth and lemon peel. You carry your cup carefully, and for a moment, everything feels delicately held together by words that were never meant to last this long, but somehow did. The next morning, the Nile is quiet, like a teacher who hasn't had coffee yet. You wander the bank, barefoot, letting the damp mud squeeze between your toes like a judgmental cat. You're here to visit a fisherman's shrine, not a grand temple, not a monument, but a small riverbank structure, barely more than a hut, dedicated to one particular man who, legend says, once sang the fish out of the water. No one's quite sure if he was a poet or just had a very compelling whistle. Inside the shrine, there's a faded mural. A man with wild hair stands in a boat, holding a fishing pole in one hand and a lyre in the other. Around him, fish leap with what can only be described as romantic urgency. A clay inscription beneath reads, "He sang of the moon and the river gave gifts." You sit for a while under the reed roof. The river moves like it's trying not to wake you. You could almost drift off right here, except a goose nearby keeps honking like it's just remembered something offensive. Here's your major historical fact. Shrines to ordinary people, particularly those seen as wise, poetic, or blessed, were not unheard of in ancient Egypt. Some were even venerated generations later by locals who added to their stories. Weird tidbit: one fisherman poet was supposedly buried with a small jar of honey and a broken flute. The honey was for sweetness in the afterlife, the flute in case the Nile got boring. Both items are now in a museum with labels that read, possibly ceremonial. Historians still debate whether such individuals were truly seen as spiritual guides or just local favorites whose stories got gently upgraded over the years. You leave the shrine with a sense of calm and a small bite on your ankle from something with too many legs. On your way back, you pass a teenage girl by the water's edge. She's scribbling a note onto a piece of clay. When she catches you staring, she shrugs. He won't know how I feel unless I fire it in the kiln. She tosses the shard into her satchel and walks off. Bold move. Romance via oven-fired confession. You make a mental note. Emotions are eternal, but pottery lasts longer. That afternoon, the wind shifts. The light turns golden, like someone added extra cinnamon to the sun. You're invited to a wedding, or what counts as one in this tiny village of potters and part-time poets. It's not formal. No official robes, no grand procession. Just music, laughter, and a woman in linen sandals who looks both excited and mildly annoyed, which probably means she's the bride. As you arrive, someone hands you a small shard of pottery. On it, written in ink, "Love is like bread, better warm and shared." The couple is exchanging oaths, not vows in the modern sense, but poetic riddles. She says, "If you were papyrus, I'd write only love on you." He replies, "Then I'd hope you spill no ink." The crowd chuckles. The oldest man in the village mutters, "Kids these days, too many metaphors." Here's your major historical fact. Ancient Egyptian weddings weren't religious ceremonies, but rather social contracts. Marriage was more practical than ceremonial, but love poetry, inscriptions, and shared toasts played a large role in courtship and domestic life. Obscure tidbit: there were traditional drinking games at weddings where guests had to recite love poems backward or in falsetto. Failure meant passing your cup to the person you secretly admired. Historians still debate whether these games were common or just isolated traditions recorded by scribes who had clearly attended some very entertaining parties. As the sun lowers, the music picks up. Hand drums, clapping, a flute that sounds slightly drunk. Bread is passed around, dipped in honey and dates. Someone near you has balanced a pot on their head and is dancing slowly in place. Not for show, just because it feels good. Children are scratching hearts into the dirt with sticks. Elders trade sarcastic compliments. You still breathe? Amazing. You still pretend that beard is real? Incredible. You sit near the fire as stars return overhead. The same constellations the poets wrote about 2000 years ago, though possibly with more flattering descriptions. There's a moment, right before the dancing really begins, when everything pauses, just long enough for a breeze to carry a half-sung lyric across the gathering. My love walks like a reed in water, swayed, but never drowned. You close your eyes. The river hums nearby. The clay shard in your hand still smells faintly of smoke and ink. And you realize you're holding someone else's feeling, frozen in time and fire. You wake early the next day to the soft sound of someone grinding pigment. A girl about 12 is hunched over a slab of stone, mixing ochre with a few drops of river water. She glances up at you with that look kids give travelers. Part curiosity, part suspicion, and part amusement that you haven't fallen into the Nile yet. She's illustrating a scene on a piece of broken pottery. Not a god, not a pharaoh, just two people sitting side by side, legs barely touching. Above them, a few uneven hieroglyphs. He made me laugh like wine. You ask her what it's for. She shrugs and says, "For my aunt. She liked someone once, but he married a merchant." This helps. Here's your historical fact. Emotional expression in ancient Egypt wasn't only the domain of royalty or scribes. Even common people made and traded these fragments, tokens of memory, offerings, messages. Some were left at tombs, others at doorways. A few were simply carried in the folds of linen, like emotional amulets. Odd cultural tidbit: there's one recorded instance of a woman writing a breakup message on a potsherd, then shattering it in front of the man's house. It read, "Your voice is dust. My sandals walk away." Brutal, stylish. Historians still debate whether such gestures were a form of sympathetic magic, protest, or simply very early performance art. As the girl finishes her painting, she carefully places the shard in a shallow kiln beside others. Dozens of tiny heartbreaks and private joys, slowly heating under the morning sun. You wander toward the edge of the village where an old man sells dates and wisdom in equal measure. He's seated beneath a papyrus awning, lazily sketching spirals in the dust with a reed. You ask what he remembers about love songs. He says, "Some were short, some were long. Most were written when someone couldn't sleep." He hands you a shard worn smooth by fingers and sun. The inscription is barely visible now. You squint. She passed the doorway, and my heart stepped outside. No one says a word for a while. The breeze says enough. That night, a storm rolls in quietly, like a cat sneaking into bed. Thunder murmurs somewhere far away. The air smells of wet clay and old secrets. You're staying in a modest home with uneven walls and a thatched roof that leaks slightly, but only in the charming places. You sit with the host family on a woven mat. The oil lamp flickers in a way that makes everyone look 10 years younger and slightly more heroic. Someone brings out a jar of wine. Someone else brings a basket of dried figs. Then, the eldest daughter begins to recite. Not loudly, not for show, just speaking to the room, like a lullaby made of words and old dust. "I met him by the pomegranate tree. He asked my name like he was asking the Nile. I told him. He smiled like someone remembering a poem they liked. The room doesn't clap. That would break the spell. Instead, a soft murmur of approval, and someone mutters, 'She's better than her brother. That's for sure.' Here's your historical fact. Many surviving Egyptian love poems were written in the voices of women. They speak with longing, humor, and vivid sensory details about stolen glances, anxious hearts, sweet smells, and fears of rejection. Weird cultural tidbit: a few poems include references to dreams where the lover visits, despite being physically far away. Some even include advice to the moon. Tell him to come, or at least to write back. Historians still debate whether these were actual correspondences, fictional compositions, or ritual incantations for sleep and closeness. As the daughter finishes her third poem, a hush falls over the house. Outside, the wind brushes against the reeds. A dog barks once, then thinks better of it. You lay down on your mat, the smell of figs still on your fingers, the whisper of verse hanging in the air like incense. Above you, the leak in the roof becomes a gentle drip, a rhythm, a metronome for dreams. Tonight, you won't need a lullaby. The past is already singing. You wake before the sun, just barely. The world is still blue and gray, that soft hour where time forgets to tick loudly. Even the Nile seems unsure whether it's moving. Outside the house, the air is heavy with river mist, soft as linen and smelling faintly of lotus. A few silhouettes move through the haze, fishermen untangling nets, a goat bleating its displeasure at being awake, and a boy sleepwalking his way toward the bakery. You sit on the steps of the house, knees drawn up, and watch the village stretch itself awake. Pot clinks, a door creaks, a yawn echoes louder than you'd expect. And now just barely a song. It isn't clear where it's coming from. Maybe from behind the grain store or the far-off reed field. The melody is slow, old, and unconcerned with rhyme. Someone singing a love poem aloud, just for themselves. She walked past, carrying barley. I lost my footing, and 3 days of breath. Here's your historical fact. Ancient Egyptian villages were full of poetry not written by scribes or nobles, but by farmers, potters, and teenage girls. The writing didn't always survive, but the habit did. Poetry was everyday magic. One obscure tidbit. In some tombs, archaeologists found cups and jugs with single-line verses scratched into the base, like fortune cookies, but warmer. One read, "May your lips never thirst for a kiss." Imagine sipping date wine and finding that surprise. Historians still debate whether these verses were meant to be read at the moment of use or after death, by whatever gods handled broken pottery and loneliness. You walk to the edge of the village. The sun finally rises, lazy, blinding, and golden. It hits the clay walls and suddenly, everything is glowing. You remember the poems. You remember the girl painting a broken shard. You remember the boy hiding love letters under floor tiles. You remember the wind blowing across your mat, whispering someone's longing from 3,000 years ago. You pick up a small potsherd from the roadside. It's blank, but warm, wind down. And now, as the sun finishes its climb and the past leans back into the shadows, you find yourself drifting, somewhere between memory and mist. The streets grow quieter. Even the goats stop arguing. The poems recede, like tidewater folding away from sand, their words tucked safely into clay and reed and linen. Imagine the stillness of a painted pot in a forgotten corner. A lover's name scratched into the glaze, faint but fierce. Imagine it resting there, under centuries of dust, waiting for someone to care again. not for fame, just for company. The air becomes thicker, softer, a blanket of breath of sand and sleep. You lie down beneath the papyrus roof, fingers curled around your own invisible shard. You think about how many words never got written, how many glances never got returned, how many poems were whispered only once. And yet, somehow it was enough. The Nile flows on as it always has, unbothered, unhurried, just like you now. So breathe in, quiet, slow, like a reed filling with wind, and breathe out even slower. Let the ink of old love stories blur. Let the papyrus close. Let the clay cool. You've walked far, through humid nights and sleepy markets, through whispered confessions and sandal-scraped courtyards. Now you're home. Drift back through the shadows of the past. Not lost, just gently out of reach. And as the night wraps around you like linen, may your dreams carry a single, strange verse scratched in clay. She smiled once. I am still resting there. Sleep well, traveler. Tomorrow can wait.